You will marry him on Friday, or you leave this house tonight.
The morning Adaeze's aunt placed a marriage certificate on the table in front of her, there were 6 other people in the room. Not family. Not people who loved her, just neighbors. 3 women from down the street who had been invited in like witnesses to something that had already been decided. Chisom stood near the window, one hand over her mouth, trying not to laugh. The gateman outside had stopped pretending to sweep. And Aunt Ngozi set the paper down the way you set down a receipt, like the transaction was already complete and all that was left was the signature. "You will marry Obinna Chukwu on Friday," she said. Her voice was light. Easy, like she was telling Adaeze what was for dinner. "Or you leave this house tonight." Obinna Chukwu, the name that every corner of Surulere already knew, the man who had just walked out of prison, the man people said had put someone in the hospital at a party on Victoria Island, broke his jaw, they said, over nothing more than a wrong look. The man whose own blood family refused to say his name in public. That man, Adaeze, did not cry, did not beg, did not say a single word, because she had lived in this house for 9 years, and she already knew that tears had never changed anything inside these walls. But here is what Aunt Ngozi did not know, what she could not have known, because no one had told her. Stay with me, because this story does not end the way anyone in that room expected it to. Adaeze had been waking up at 5 in the morning for 9 years, not because anyone asked her to, because no one else would. She cooked breakfast for the entire house before she left for work, rice, stew, sometimes akara when there were enough beans, and she left it on the stove covered with a pot lid so it would stay warm. Chisom slept until 9. Chisom entel Chisom ate with both elbows on the table and left her plate exactly where she finished it. And no one said a word about it. Adaeze worked as an accountant at a small firm on Lagos Island, the kind of office where the air conditioning only worked on one side of the room, and everyone pretended not to notice. She was good at her job. Better than good. But every naira she brought home went to Aunt Ngozi for what the woman called house expenses. 9 years of house expenses. 9 years of sleeping in the small room at the back of the compound, the one that caught the afternoon heat and held it through the night. 9 years of being the first one up, and the last one thanked. But there was something in that room that no one in the house knew existed. Under her mattress, tucked between 2 old textbooks, was a small notebook. Not a diary. Not complaints written down in secret. 9 years of numbers, every transaction she had quietly observed. Every figure that passed through Aunt Ngozi's hands that did not match what the woman said out loud. Adaeze had not written it down to use it. She had written it down to remind herself that she could still see the truth even when no one around her was speaking it. That notebook was the only thing in that house that was entirely hers, and Aunt Ngozi did not know it existed. The so-called family council was not a family council. There was no family, only 3 women from the neighborhood who owed Aunt Ngozi favors, a cousin who had driven 2 hours to eat jollof rice, and Chisom sitting in the best chair like she had earned it. Aunt Ngozi stood at the center of the room in a wrapper she reserved for important occasions and announced that Adaeze's late father had left behind a debt. A large one. And the time had come to settle it. Adaeze will marry into the Chukwu family, she said. This is how the debt is cleared. This is how she repays everything this house has given her. One of the neighbor women nodded slowly, like she was watching a church service. Another one said, in the slow and deliberate way of someone who had already made up her mind and was simply waiting for her cue. What Aunt Ngozi did not say out loud, what only she knew, was that this arrangement had nothing to do with any debt from Adaeze's father. It was a deal with Kelechi Chukwu, Obinna's older brother. Kelechi had approached Ngozi 3 months earlier with a proposition. Her dirty business debts, wiped clean not in cash, which would leave a paper trail, but in the form of a wife for his newly released brother. A wife who was poor, had no connections, no family with power, and no way to fight back. Adaeze fit every requirement. Chisom looked at her cousin across the room and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You should be grateful, you know. Without my mother, you would have been sleeping on the street a long time ago." A few people nodded. Adaeze stood straight, did not lower her head, did not speak. In the corner of the room, one of the older women, A woman with grey at her temples and hands that looked like they had worked hard their whole lives, watched Adaeze with an expression that was not pity. It was recognition, like she had seen this before and knew exactly what it meant. By the time the neighbors left, the rumors about Obinna had filled every corner of the compound. He had put a man in the hospital at a party in Victoria Island. No one knew exactly why, but the story grew each time someone told it. His former employees were afraid to speak his name, one woman said. Chisholm added that even his own family had cut him off. Can you imagine? His own blood. Aunt Ngozi waved her hand like all of it was beside the point. What matters is that his family owes me, she said. And now that debt will be paid. You just need to show up on Friday. Adaeze. That is all you need to do. That evening, Adaeze went to her room. She pulled the small notebook from under the mattress. She did not open it to a new page. She opened it to the beginning, the very first entry. Written 9 years ago in handwriting that was younger and more careful than it was now. She read through it slowly. Then she closed it, put it back, turned off the light, and lay in the dark thinking about a man she had never met. She met him 2 days before the wedding. He came in a car that had seen better years, not broken down. Just old and honest about it. He wore a plain white shirt and dark trousers. Nothing about him looked like the monster the neighborhood had been describing for a week. He shook her hand. Not the handshake of a man performing politeness, the handshake of someone who had spent years doing real work with their hands and had not forgotten how. He did not speak much, did not explain himself, did not apologize for any of it. He looked directly at her for a long moment, the kind of look that was not aggressive, just honest, like he was trying to see what was actually there, and then he looked away. Adaeze noticed his shoes. The soles were worn thin at the heel, but the leather was polished, clean to the point of deliberate. A man that careful about something so small was not a careless man. She filed that away. Obinna noticed one thing about her. When he looked at her, she did not look away. In the 2 years before this moment, very few people had been able to do that. That same evening, in a small room in Owerri, a phone rang. An old man sat at a desk, covered in folders, thick ones, organized, labeled in handwriting that had been precise for 30 years. He picked up on the second ring. "You are out," the old man said. "Not a question. I am out," Obinna said. "Are you well, Uncle Chidi?" "I am well." "Are you?" A pause, and then, "Is everything still there?" "Every single page," the old man said. "Exactly as you left it. I have not moved anything." "Good. When?" Obinna was quiet for a moment. Then, "Not yet, but soon. Now I need you to understand something, because this is the part of the story that changes everything else." Before Obinna was taken to begin his sentence, before the gates closed behind him, he had made one phone call. Not to a lawyer, not to a friend, to Mr. Chidi, the chief accountant who had served his father's company for 30 years and had never once chosen the easier thing over the right thing. In that call, Obinna had transferred everything, every document, every piece of evidence that proved his older brother Kelechi had manufactured the fraud charges, had fabricated records, paid people to testify, and then used the threat of dragging Mr. Chidi himself into the case to force Obinna to stop fighting. Obinna had stopped fighting not because he was guilty, not because he was weak, but because he could not let an old man who had served his family faithfully for 3 decades be destroyed to save himself. So he went quietly, and Kelechi sat down in the chair that had always belonged to his brother and began running the largest private conglomerate in Lagos, as though it had always been his. As though Obinna had never existed and Aunt Ngozi did not know any of this. She knew only that she had a debt with Kelechi's people, and that Obinna was a dangerous ex-convict with a rough face and an old car, and that her niece had no choice but to be useful for once. Kelechi did not know that the evidence still existed. He thought he had won. Completely. Permanently. Only Mr. Chidi knew. And now you know. The bomb was sitting in a room in Owerri, patient, undisturbed, waiting for the right moment, and Obinna had just told the man holding it. Soon. The night before the wedding, the house was loud with Aunt Ngozi's satisfaction. She laughed on the phone with someone for 40 minutes. Chisom played music from her room. Adaeze sat alone in the kitchen. The rest of the house moved around her the way water moves around a stone without acknowledging that the stone was there. She reached under the loose tile near the back wall where she had moved the notebook the week before. She took it out, opened it to the last page with writing, read the final entry, then turned to the blank page behind it, put her hand flat against the paper, did not write anything, just held it there for a moment, then closed the notebook, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. She did not cry. She did not pray out loud. She was simply a woman preparing to walk through a door she had not chosen with every part of herself intact. Drop a comment right now that says Adaeze deserves better if you were already on her side before she said a single word. The wedding was small. Aunt Ngozi had made sure of that not out of modesty, but because a small wedding was easier to control. The compound was swept clean the morning of. Plastic chairs borrowed from the church down the road were arranged in 2 short rows. And Aunt Ngozi stood at the entrance in the most expensive aso oak she owned, the one she only brought out when she needed people to understand that she had won something. She greeted every guest with both hands outstretched, laughing before they finished their sentences, making sure everyone in earshot understood that this was her doing, her arrangement, her success. Chisom had appointed herself photographer. She moved through the small gathering with her phone raised, narrating quietly to herself, "My little sister is getting married, wishing her happiness." She had already planned the caption. Adaeze wore a simple white dress. Nobody had asked what she wanted to wear. Nobody had thought to ask. She stood in the doorway of the compound and looked at the 2 short rows of plastic chairs and the borrowed canopy, and the man standing at the far end of it all. And she walked forward, not because she had accepted this, because she had made a decision about how she would carry herself through it. At the moment of the ring, Obinna's hand did not shake. Neither did hers. They looked at each other not with love, not with resentment, but with the particular understanding of 2 people who both knew exactly what this was, and had decided, separately, to remain standing. After the ceremony, while the guests ate and Aunt Ngozi held court near the food table, Chisom appeared at Adaeze's elbow with a sweet smile. "Sis, let me hold your ID documents," she said. Things get lost easily in crowded places. Adaeze looked at her cousin. There was no reason to say no. Not today. Not in front of everyone. She handed them over. Chisom slipped them into her small bag and moved away through the crowd. Near the back wall, Aunt Ngozi watched and gave the smallest nod. The compound in Surulere was not what Adaeze had expected. She did not know what she had expected, something matching the rumors, maybe. Broken things, the smell of anger. Instead she found a yard that had been swept recently, a shelf near the door with books stacked too deep, a kitchen that was clean in the particular way of someone who cooked seriously and cleaned up after themselves, and no bottles of anything anywhere, no broken furniture, no evidence of a man who could not control himself. She stood in the main room and looked around slowly while Obinna carried the bags inside. That was when Mama Obi came out of the kitchen. She was small and moved like someone who had lived in this compound long enough to know exactly which floorboards creaked and which ones did not. She carried a glass of cold water in both hands and held it out to Adaeze with a nod that was not performance, just acknowledgement. Not pity, not curiosity. She looked at Adaeze the way you look at something you recognize, something you have seen the shape of before, even if you have not seen this exact version of it. Later that evening, after Adaeze had gone to the room to unpack, Mama Obi found Obinna in the yard. "She is stronger than she looks," she said. Obinna did not answer. But he did not disagree. Adaeze had not survived 9 years in that house by waiting for the truth to arrive on its own. She had learned early that the truth was something you had to go looking for quietly, without announcing that you were looking. So in the first 2 weeks, she looked. She went to the market in the mornings, and she asked questions the way she had always asked questions, lightly, sideways, like she was just making conversation. She talked to the woman who sold pepper near the entrance of the compound, the man who ran the printing shop 2 streets over, the older woman at church who had lived in Surulere for 40 years and knew everything about everyone. The first rumor was the one about the party on Victoria Island. The man who worked the door at that hotel remembered it clearly. There had been a girl, one of the young servers, barely 20. A guest had cornered her in a side hallway. Most people at the party either didn't see it or decided not to. Obinna saw it. He was the only person who walked over. The guest ended up in hospital. Was he wrong? The doorman said, and shrugged like the answer was obvious. The second rumor was the one about employees who were afraid to speak his name. She found one of them, a man who now worked at a logistics firm, in a papa. He did not want to talk at first. Then he said, "He fired me. Caught me signing off on contracts that didn't exist. I was angry for a long time." A pause. But he wasn't wrong. The third rumor, the one about his own family cutting him off, came apart the fastest. A neighbor who had lived 3 houses down from the Chukwu family home said it plainly. It was Kelechi who went to the papers first. Right after Obinna was arrested. Called his own brother dangerous. Said the family was ashamed. She let that sit. She did not share any of this with Obinna. She just kept watching, kept adding to what she already knew. Aunt Ngozi began visiting the compound. Not occasionally, regularly. She came with small gifts, a bag of rice, a tin of tomatoes, and she sat with Obinna when Adaeze was at work and smiled her wide, practiced smile and asked questions that were not questions. Where did he go for meetings? Who came to see him? Whether he had any business interests she could help facilitate. Behind Adaeze's back, Aunt Ngozi pulled Chisom aside and lowered her voice. "Something is not right about this man," she said. "House looks poor, but he keeps getting visitors that look like they came from somewhere else." Chisom had already gone further. One afternoon she had found Adaeze's phone left on the kitchen counter. She picked it up, went through the contacts, photographed the messages she could access, brought everything back to her mother. That evening, Adaeze came home and noticed her phone was a few inches from where she had left it. She said nothing. She moved the small notebook to a new hiding place behind the loose tile in the kitchen, sealed with the weight of the stove. She put a new passcode on the phone, and she went back to watching. It was Mr. Chidi's visit that changed everything. He came from Owerri on a Tuesday. An old man in a pressed shirt carrying a briefcase that had been expensive once. He stayed for 2 hours. Chisom, parked down the street in a borrowed car, photographed him from a distance. That night she sent the photo to her mother. Aunt Ngozi had someone trace the name. By morning she knew. The old man had been the chief accountant of one of the largest conglomerates in Lagos for 30 years. She drew the wrong conclusion immediately. She decided that Obinna had powerful financial connections. Quiet money. The kind that didn't announce itself. She decided she needed to be closer to it. 3 days later, she arrived at the compound while Adaeze was at work. She sat across from Obinna in the main room and explained, in her warmest voice, that as the senior family member she was in the best position to represent his interests in any business dealings that required a respected community presence. "I have connections," she said. "I know people. Let me be useful to you." Obinna looked at her for a long time, the kind of look that takes in everything and gives back nothing. Then, "I will think about it." He smiled just slightly, just briefly. Aunt Ngozi did not notice the smile. She went home satisfied, certain she had just planted a seed. That evening, Obinna told Adaeze what had happened. He said it simply, without commentary, watching her face while he spoke. Adaeze listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone who is organizing what they already know alongside what they have just been told. Then she stood up, walked to the kitchen, reached behind the stove, and came back with the small notebook. She set it on the table in front of him. "What is this?" he asked. 9 years, she said. Every transaction I watched passed through her hands that did not match what she said out loud. "I don't know if you need it, but I thought you should know what kind of person she is." She said it without drama, without asking for anything in return. This was not strategy. This was the first time in 9 years that Adaeze had decided to trust someone, not because she had to, but because she had been watching long enough to make a choice. Obinna opened the notebook. He turned through the pages slowly, each page the same. Dates, figures, names. Quiet observations written in small, careful handwriting. 9 years of a woman who saw everything and said nothing because there was no one to say it to. He set the notebook down. He looked at his wife. Not the way he had been looking at her before, measuring, cautious, evaluating. Something had shifted, and in the kitchen doorway, Mama Obi stood with a dish towel in her hands. She had heard everything. She said nothing, just smiled to herself and turned back to the stove. It was late when they finally spoke like two people instead of two strangers sharing the same walls. The compound was quiet. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where Adaeze had sat alone on her first night here, unsure of everything. "What were you actually convicted of?" she asked. "Not aggressive, just direct. Financial fraud," he said. "According to the charge sheet. Did you do it?" The question landed in the room and stayed there. He looked at her for a long moment. "No." "Then why didn't you fight it?" Another pause, longer this time, and then, for the first time since leaving prison, Obinna told the truth to another human being. "Because if I had fought it the way I needed to fight it, they would have pulled an old man into it who had nothing to do with anything. A man who gave 30 years of his life to my father's company and deserved to retire in peace. And I could not let that happen." He said it without self-pity, without asking her to admire him for it. Just facts. Adaeze nodded. Did not ask who the old man was. Did not ask what the evidence was. Did not push for more than he had offered. "You are not going to ask more," he said. "You have said enough," she answered. He looked at her. She looked back. Outside, the Harmattan wind moved through the compound, and the single bulb above the kitchen table swayed once and steadied. Neither of them moved. "Stay with me. Because the secret I told you about at the beginning of this story, the thing sitting in Mr. Chidi's briefcase in Owari, is almost ready. The people who are most comfortable right now are about to become the most afraid. And the woman who has been silent for 9 years is about to become impossible to ignore." Aunt Ngozi had never been a patient woman, but she had always been a calculating one. And in the 3 weeks after her visit to the compound, she had calculated that waiting was costing her money. She had a debt with Kelechi's people. Yes, but she also had eyes. And her eyes had told her that Obinna Chukwu was connected to something larger than a man with an old car and a criminal record was supposed to be. She decided to move faster. She went to the registry office with Adaeze's identity documents, the ones Chisom had collected on the wedding day, and she signed papers. Not in her own name, in Adaeze's name. She represented herself as the authorized family representative of Obinna Chukwu's household and used that representation to access a small government construction contract that had been advertised publicly. It was not a large contract, but it was a start. Chisom stood outside the registry office afterward and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "I am much smarter than Adaeze." She believed this completely. The following week, Aunt Ngozi went further. She arranged a meeting with a property developer, held it at the compound on a Tuesday afternoon, while Adaeze was at work and Obinna was across town. She sat at the table in the main room like she owned the walls around her. She used Obinna's name 4 times in the first 10 minutes. She poured tea for the developer's assistant from a pot she had brought herself. In the kitchen, Mama Obi stood at the counter and listened to everything. She washed the same cup twice. She did not go out. She did not say a word. She just listened. And she remembered. That afternoon, when Adaeze came home, Mama Obi met her at the gate. She spoke quietly and quickly. She said exactly what she had seen and heard: the developer, the documents, the way Aunt Ngozi had sat at that table, the name she had dropped 4 times in 10 minutes. Nothing added. Nothing softened. Just the truth. Passed from one woman to another. Adaeze called Obinna before she had even taken off her shoes. She told him everything. On the other end of the line there was silence. 3 full seconds of it. Then, "You do not need to do anything. Just leave it alone." His voice was completely calm, like a man who had been waiting for exactly this. That night, Obinna sat at his desk for a long time after Adaeze had gone to sleep. He picked up the phone, dialed a number he had not dialed in 18 months. 1 ring. "It is time, uncle." On the other end, Mr. Chidi exhaled slowly. "I have waited 18 months for this day," the old man said. "Is everything still intact?" Every page, every recording, every transfer record, exactly as you gave it to me. Then bring it. The next morning, Obinna made 4 more calls to men who had served on the board of Chukwu Group under his father, men that Kelechi had quietly pushed to the margins one by one after taking control, men who had waited because they had no choice, but who had never signed away their legal standing. They listened. They said yes. By afternoon, a venue had been booked at the conglomerate's own headquarters on the Lekki-Epe Expressway. A formal event press, government officials, business partners, all invited. The stated purpose: the signing of a major federal infrastructure contract, important enough that no one with any connection to the company could justify being absent. Mr. Chidi placed a call to Aunt Ngozi that same day. His voice was warm and professional. "Madam Ngozi," he said, "I understand you have been representing the Chukwu family in certain business matters. There is a formal ceremony at the headquarters this Thursday. If you wish to make your role official, this would be the appropriate occasion. Senior officials will be present." Aunt Ngozi said she would be there. She said it before he finished the sentence. The board sent a separate message to Kelechi through the company's legal office informing him that his signature was required on the federal contract documents in his current capacity as acting head of the conglomerate. His presence was not optional. Kelechi arrived at the Lekki headquarters that Thursday in a car that cost more than most people in Surulere earned in 5 years. He had brought his personal lawyer. He was ready to sign. Aunt Ngozi arrived 40 minutes early. She wore a wrapper that had cost her 3 weeks of careful saving. She had pressed it the night before. Chisom walked beside her in new shoes she had bought specifically for this occasion. They were escorted to the VIP section without any resistance. Adaeze arrived separately. Quietly, she sat at the back of the hall in a plain dress. No one escorted her anywhere. She had asked Obinna only one question before they left. "Should I be there?" He had said, "Yes. Sit at the back. You will want to see this." The hall filled quickly. Federal officials in Agbada. Business partners with name cards. 3 journalists from different outlets. Cameras already set up along the far wall. Aunt Ngozi looked around the room and felt, for the first time in a long time, that she was exactly where she deserved to be. Chisom crossed her legs and smoothed her skirt and tried to look like someone who attended these things regularly. At the front of the room, a lawyer for the conglomerate stood at a lectern and welcomed everyone. Then he said, "Before we proceed to the signing, we need to address a legal matter that has come to our attention regarding the unauthorized use of family credentials and fraudulent representation." The room shifted. Not dramatically, just shifted. The large screen at the front of the hall came to life. Documents. A forged signature on a government contract application side by side with Adaeze's actual signature from her employment records. Photographs of Aunt Ngozi sitting at the compound table, meeting with the property developer, pouring tea, using Obinna's name. A log of communications between Aunt Ngozi and 3 different contractors over the past 3 weeks. Aunt Ngozi stood up. Fast. "This is a misunderstanding," she started. "Ma'am," the lawyer said, without raising his voice. "There is no misunderstanding here." Chisom's hands had gone very still in her lap. She looked to her left. She looked to her right. The nearest exit was behind 3 rows of journalists. There was no version of walking out of this room that did not end up on camera. And then the doors at the back of the hall opened. Not the main doors, the side doors. Mr. Chidi walked in. He was 71 years old and he walked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally been given permission to set it down. Behind him, 2 lawyers in dark suits and a representative from the National Financial Investigation Authority. He carried a briefcase, the same one. He walked to the front of the room without hurrying and set the briefcase on the table and opened it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said. His voice was steady. 30 years of doing this work had made his voice permanently steady. "I am Chidi Okafor, chief accountant of Chukwu Group, for 30 years under Mr. Sode. Emmanuel Chukwu and I am presenting evidence of document forgery, coercion, and unlawful corporate takeover." The room did not make a sound. The first screen went dark. The second screen came on. Internal emails, fabricated transfer records, A phone call played through the hall speakers in which a voice that everyone in that room recognized directed someone on the other end to alter 3 specific financial documents and backdate them to implicate a named individual, Kelechi's voice, Kelechi, who was sitting in the 3rd row of the VIP section. Kelechi, who had come here to sign a contract. Kelechi, who had spent 18 months running a company that did not belong to him and telling anyone who would listen that his brother was dangerous. He looked at the screen. His face went the color of old concrete. His personal lawyer put a hand on his arm. He shook it off. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to say. The recording kept playing. The 3rd piece of evidence was a written statement witnessed and notarized in which Kelechi had threatened to implicate Mr. Chidi in the fraud case if Obinna continued to mount a legal defense. The statement had been prepared 18 months ago, the night before Obinna stopped fighting, the night he made his choice. The representative from the National Financial Investigation Authority stood and walked toward the VIP section. Not quickly. Deliberately, the way people walk when the outcome is already decided. The main doors opened one final time. Obinna walked in. He wore a dark suit, not expensive, not showy, just correct. He walked to the front of the room without looking anywhere but forward. He did not look at Kelechi. He did not look at Aunt Ngozi. He walked up to the lectern and stood beside Mr. Chidi. Mr. Chidi turned to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, the lawful and sole owner of Chukwu Group. Mr. Obinna Chukwu. The room stood, not all at once. One person, then another, then the whole room. Aunt Ngozi looked at Obinna, then at the screen, then at Obinna. Again, her mouth opened, nothing came out. The man she had used as a transaction, the ex-convict she had handed her niece to like a settlement, was standing at the front of this hall being recognized by federal officials and 30 years of institutional memory. She turned to Adaeze. At the back of the room, sitting quietly in her plain dress. You knew about this from the beginning. Aunt Ngozi's voice cracked on the last word. You set me up. Adaeze stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I did not set anyone up, she said. I never had enough of anything to do that. After everything I have done for you. Adaeze looked at her aunt. Really looked at her. The way you look at something you have seen clearly for a long time and are finally saying out loud, What have you done for me, Aunt Ngozi? She said. Tell the truth for once. The room was very quiet. Aunt Ngozi opened her mouth, closed it. There was no answer. There had never been an answer. There had only ever been the performance of an answer the way she had always performed generosity, performed sacrifice, performed the role of the woman who had done everything for a niece who had nothing. The performance was over. The legal representative moved toward Aunt Ngozi and Chisom with papers in hand. Chisom tried to pull her mother toward the side exit. She stumbled on the step at the threshold. Nobody moved to help her. Not the journalists. Not the officials. Not the neighbors who had sat in her mother's living room and nodded while Adaeze was handed over like a debt payment. None of them. Kelechi was escorted out through a different door. He did not look at his brother as he left. He kept his eyes on the floor. Obinna watched him go. There was no satisfaction on his face. No anger. Just the particular exhaustion of a man who has been right for a very long time and never wanted to need to prove it. At the back of the room, Adaeze sat down again. The hall was beginning to reorganize itself around what had just happened. Officials moving. Lawyers talking. Cameras recording. The machinery of consequence setting into motion. She sat still in the middle of all of it. Obinna, from the front of the room, looked toward the back. He found her immediately. 1 second. Just one, then he turned back to the officials waiting for him. Adaeze looked down at her hands in her lap. They were not shaking. They had not shaken once. The hall had emptied by the time Adaeze and Obinna were finally alone in it. Not entirely alone, there were still lawyers in a side room, officials exchanging cards near the entrance, a camera crew breaking down their equipment along the far wall. But the noise had moved away from them, and in the space that was left, they sat across from each other at a small table near the window, the Lekki skyline behind the glass. The last of the afternoon light coming in flat and quiet. You knew Aunt Ngozi would do that from the beginning? Adaeze asked. Obinna considered the question the way he considered most things fully, without rushing. I knew what kind of person she was the first time I sat across from her, he said. I did not know exactly what she would do, but I knew she would do something. People like her always do. And me? He looked at her. I did not know where you would be standing when it happened. I did nothing, she said. I know. He looked at her for a moment. Then, you just stood straight. That was all that needed to be done. She was quiet for a moment. Then, why did you not tell me from the beginning? He did not look away. Because I needed to know who you were before you knew who I was. She thought about that. 9 years of being in a house where people had already decided who she was before she opened her mouth. 9 years of being known as the niece, the debt, the obligation, the girl sleeping in the back room. She understood what he meant. Adaeze nodded. Not angry, just understanding. Obinna stood and walked around the table and placed his hand on her shoulder, not pulling her anywhere, not asking for anything, just present. She did not move away. They drove back to Surulere that evening. Not to Lekki. Not to any of the places that now, technically, belonged to Obinna. Back to the compound. The yard with the swept concrete and the shelf of books and the kitchen that smelled like pepper soup and something older, something that had been lived in long enough to have a character of its own. Adaeze found Mama Obi sitting in the kitchen in the dark, the way she sometimes did in the evenings when the day had been long. Adaeze sat down across from her. She did not ask how Mama Obi already knew. She just asked, that first day, when you looked at me, what did you see? Mama Obi was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I saw a girl who had not broken in 9 years. A pause. I just did not know that girl was waiting for the right person to trust. Adaeze looked at the old woman across the table. For a long time she did not speak, because there was nothing to add to that. It was exactly right. She had not broken. Not once. Not in 9 years of waking at 5 in the morning for people who never said thank you. Not in the living room when the marriage certificate was placed in front of her like a bill. Not at the altar when no one had asked what she wanted to wear. Not in the hall today when her aunt had turned to her with accusations spilling out of a mouth that had never once offered anything genuine. She had not broken. She had only waited. Obinna came into the kitchen a few minutes later. He set something on the table in front of Adaeze without speaking. The small notebook he had brought it from the briefcase where he had been keeping it safe since the night she gave it to him. Adaeze looked at it. The cover worn at the corners. 9 years of her handwriting inside. 9 years of seeing clearly when no one around her was bothering to look. She reached out and pushed it gently to the side. She did not need it anymore. Mama Obi watched this without a word. Then she got up, moved to the stove, and began heating something that smelled like it had been ready for hours, like she had known they would be coming home and had prepared accordingly. Just cooked. Just stayed. 6 months passed. Not quickly. In the way that good time passes with texture, with weight, with the small accumulations of ordinary life that are easy to overlook until you stop and realize how much has changed. Adaeze was appointed head of internal audit at Chukwu Group, not because she was Obinna's wife. The board had reviewed her credentials themselves, a master's degree in finance completed at night on a scholarship that no one in Aunt Ngozi's house had ever known about, and 9 years of the sharpest financial eye anyone on that team had encountered in recent memory. She had earned it before she ever walked into that hall. She had just never had anywhere to put it. Aunt Ngozi was awaiting trial in Lagos. The charges were specific and well documented, and there was no version of the evidence that left her any room. Chisom had gone to stay with distant relatives in Owerri. She had left on a bus with 1 bag. Nobody had seen her since. Kelechi faced criminal charges, fraud, coercion, false testimony. He had engaged 3 separate law firms in the first 2 weeks. None of them had made the evidence disappear, because you cannot make 30 years of careful record-keeping disappear. Mr. Chidi retired to Jos, close to his family, close to the hills he had grown up near, and never stopped missing. Obinna had bought him a house, a small one, on a quiet street with a garden, not as payment, not as obligation, because it was the right thing to do. And because Mr. Chidi had spent 18 months holding a bomb steady so that justice could land exactly where it needed to. That deserved more than a handshake. On a Tuesday morning in the compound at Surulere, Adaeze sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she had made for herself. Obinna came in from outside, set a second cup down in front of her without being asked, and sat across from her with the newspaper folded under his arm. He opened it. She drank her tea. Neither of them said anything, not because there was nothing to say, because there was nothing that needed saying. This was the thing that 9 years of noise had never given her, not the title, not the office on the 4th floor of a building in Lekki, not the moment in the hall when the room stood up. This a Tuesday morning, a cup of tea, a man sitting across from her reading the paper. Normal. Genuinely normal. Mama Obi came out of the back with a plate of bread and set it on the table between them. She looked at the two of them for a moment, unhurried, taking it in. Then she went back inside. She did not say anything. She did not need to. There are people who are treated like a burden for the whole of their lives until the day comes when everyone around them is forced to reckon with the fact that they were the only thing holding everything together all along. Adaeze did not change. She was the same woman who woke at 5 in the morning. The same woman who kept a notebook under a mattress because the truth mattered even when no one was asking for it. The same woman who stood straight in a room full of people who had already decided she had no options. What changed was the world around her. Because eventually, if you do not break, if you do not become what was done to you, the world has no choice but to finally look at you directly, instead of looking through you like you were never there. If someone in your life is being made to feel invisible in the very place that is supposed to be home, share this story with them. Not because it will fix anything, but because sometimes the most important thing is to know that someone else has seen it clearly and that it did not end there. Drop a comment with just 2 words. I held. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who mistook your silence for surrender, your stillness for weakness, your patience for defeat, just 2 words. I want to see how many of you are still standing. She never needed them to see her from the beginning, she only needed them to find it impossible to look away at the end.